People say I'm too old or I've already missed my chance. And what they really misunderstand is how adaptable human biology actually is. You don't die of birth age, you die when your systems fail. And that's where it becomes powerful. Because unlike chronological age, biological age is responsive. As long as you're alive, your body is responding to what you do consistently. The body is far more forgiving and far more responsive than we ever thought. And once people understand that, aging stops feeling like something that's happening to them, and it starts feeling like something that they can actively participate in.
Welcome back to The Young Lab, the show where internal health, performance, and regenerative aesthetics come together under one evidence-backed framework. In the last episode, we explored why inside-out human optimization matters. And today, we're getting very specific. Dr. Young is 54 years old, but biologically, he tests closer to 31. And that immediately tends to stop people in their tracks. And when people hear biologically 31 at 54, it sounds almost unbelievable. So before we can even really talk about how you got there, what does biological age actually mean? And how is it different from chronological age? Hi, Dr. Young. I'm excited to hear more about this and get specific here.
I guess we really need to work on or discuss the terminology first. So chronological age is just time. It's the number of birthdays that you've had. Biological age is different. It is an estimate of how well your body's systems are actually functioning relative to population norms. When people hear biologically 31 at 54, it can sound like a headline, but what it really means is that there are certain systems in my body that are performing at a level that we typically expect in someone much younger. Biological age isn't just one single thing. It can be assessed in different ways. Cardiovascular age, which reflects heart, lung, vascular, and aerobic fitness. Now also it can be assessed in metabolic age, which reflects insulin sensitivity, inflammation, and energy regulation. And another is cellular or epigenetic age, often measured through DNA methylation, which looks at aging at a cellular level. These measures don't always match perfectly, and that's normal. In my case, my cardiovascular age tested at 31, meaning my aerobic capacity and vascular health resemble that of a much younger person. My epigenetic or biological age was 41, and this was based on DNA methylation. It reflects longer-term biological aging. So biological age isn't about denying reality or chasing a number. It's about understanding how fast or slow different systems are aging and whether they're trending in the right direction. And that's where it becomes powerful. Because unlike chronological age, biological age is responsive. It changes based on how you move, how you sleep, how you eat, how you manage stress, and how consistently you recover. You don't die of birth age, you die when your systems fail. Biological age helps us understand risk, resilience, and health span. Not just how long you live, but how well you're likely to live along the way.
Do you remember the first time when you actually saw your own data, your biomarkers, VO2 max, metabolic markers, and realized your biology just didn't match your age? Was there that moment that really stood out to you?
I do. And what stood out wasn't one number, it was the pattern across the data. When I looked at my biomarkers, my VO2 max and my metabolic markers, they were all pointing in the same direction. My biology was aging much more slowly than the calendar suggested. That doesn't mean I'm 31. It means that my heart, my blood vessels, my aerobic system are functioning like someone who's much younger. But it reflects things like VO2 max, vascular health, and how efficient my body delivers and uses oxygen. At the same time, my metabolic markers, we're talking about insulin sensitivity, inflammation, lipid profiles, were consistently favorable, suggesting that my metabolism was resilient and efficient. Later, when I looked at my DNA methylation results, which estimated my biological age at 41, that really tied it all together. DNA methylation gives us a view of aging at the cellular level, how lifestyle and environment have shaped biology over time. What struck me the most was the alignment. These were all very different ways of measuring aging, cardiovascular function, metabolic health, and cellular aging. And they were all telling the same story. And that was the moment that it really clicked for me. Your biology is consistently responding to signals: how you move, how you sleep, how you eat, how you manage stress. Seeing that data didn't make me feel invincible, it made me feel responsible. Because once you understand that aging is measurable, it also becomes influenceable.
And I think beyond that, there is a misconception that biological age reversal is about one supplement, one protocol, or even one hack, right? So, can you talk about the timeline here, how long this took, and why that really matters?
I'm really glad that you asked this because this is where a lot of the confusion and honestly disappointment around longevity comes from or occurs. There's this idea that biological age improvement must come from one supplement, one protocol, or one breakthrough hack. And that mindset is everywhere. But the truth is, this wasn't overnight. It wasn't fast, and it definitely wasn't driven by a single thing. What you're seeing in my data is the results of years of consistent behavior layered over time. I like to think of longevity less like a transformation and more like compound interest. Small, often unglamorous decisions, repeated daily, quietly add up. And we're talking about sleep and training and building muscle and improving cardiovascular fitness and eating intentionally, managing stress, recovering on purpose. None of these are exciting on their own, but together they reshape biology. And that timeline really matters because it builds trust. If people think longevity happens quickly, they're either chasing the wrong things or they get discouraged when these results don't show up. What the data consistently shows is that biology responds to repetition, not intensity. You do not have to be extreme. You do not have to be perfect, but you do need to be consistent. That's why I describe longevity as a skill and not a hack. Skills are learned, they're practiced, they improve over time. At first, progress feels slow, and sometimes you're not even sure if it's working. And then one day you look back and you realize your baseline is completely different. Your energy levels are better, your recovery is faster, your resilience is better. And this is how real change happens. And the encouraging part of all of this is that once you start sending the right signals consistently, the body is incredibly responsive. And that's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. And it's the part that actually works.
Absolutely. So let's start with the foundation. So you have been plant based for decades and still compete athletically at such a high level. So, how did nutrition specifically contribute to your biological age, especially when people still believe you need animal protein to stay strong?
I'm glad you asked. Nutrition has been foundational for me, but not because of it's a trend or it's a belief system. It's been foundational because that's what the science shows about how biology actually ages. For a long time, the assumption was that you needed animal protein to stay strong, build muscle, and perform at a high level. That belief is still pretty common, but it's increasingly outdated and antiquated. When you look at a lot of the more recent training studies, what they consistently show is this: when total protein intake is adequate and resistance training is present, plant protein can build and preserve muscle and strength just as effectively as animal protein. Muscle doesn't respond to food labels. It responds to amino acids and mechanical load. Where plant based nutrition really differentiates itself and why it's contributed to my biological age is upstream. Plant forward diets consistently support better insulin sensitivity, lower inflammation, and improve vascular health. Those systems directly affect muscle quality, recovery, and long term performance as we age. And when we zoom out to longevity, the data becomes even more compelling. Large prospective studies, including the Nurses Health Study, have shown that diets higher in plant protein and substituting plant protein for certain animal sources are associated with lower all-cause mortality and a greater likelihood of healthy aging, meaning preserved physical and cognitive function over time. That's an important distinction. It's not just about living longer, it's about maintaining capacity. In my own case, being plant-based hasn't limited performance. Actually, it's supported it. I train hard, I prioritize sleep, I prioritize strength. I'm intentional about protein and amino acids, and I recover well. So the takeaway isn't that everyone needs to eat exactly like I do. It's that the old narrative that you must choose between strength and longevity simply isn't supported by the evidence anymore. When nutrition supports metabolic health, recovery, and training adaptations, you can absolutely have both.
Often say that muscle is the organ of longevity. So, how do strength, cardiorespiratory fitness, and VO2 max directly influence biological age? And how does your high rocks training fit into that?
I always say muscle is the organ of longevity because biologically it touches almost every system that determines how we age. Most people think of muscle as something cosmetic, strength, or appearance, but that's actually the least important part. Muscle is first and foremost a metabolic organ. It is where the majority of glucose from the bloodstream is taken up and used for energy. This means that muscle plays a central role in insulin sensitivity, which is one of the most important and least understood drivers of biological aging. Let me pause for a moment and explain what insulin sensitivity actually means. Insulin is a hormone that helps move glucose or sugar from the bloodstream into the cells, where it's used for energy. When you're insulin sensitive, a small amount of insulin does its job effectively or efficiently. Cells respond, glucose is cleared, and energy is available when it's needed. When insulin resistance develops, cells stop responding well. The body has to produce more and more insulin to get the same effect. Over time, blood sugars stay higher, inflammation increases, fat storage increases, and energy regulation worsens. And that's where the problems start. Insulin resistance doesn't show up overnight. It develops quietly, often years before someone is diagnosed with anything, and it affects far more than blood sugar. Insulin resistance contributes to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, cognitive decline, chronic inflammation, accelerated biological aging. From an aging perspective, insulin resistance is one of the fastest ways to age your biology. The encouraging part is that insulin sensitivity is highly modifiable. It responds quickly to movement and exercise, especially resistance training. Cardiovascular fitness, it responds to sleep quality, it responds to nutrition quality and timing. It responds to stress management. And that's why muscle matters so much. Muscle is also a structural and functional organ. It protects against frailty, it protects against falls, it protects against fractures, and it protects against loss of independence. Muscle strength is one of the strongest predictors we have of whether someone will remain functional as they age. And there's a third role people rarely hear about. Muscle is a signaling agent or organ. When muscle contracts, it releases molecules called myokines. And these act like hormones and communicate with other organs throughout the body, most importantly, the brain. Some myokines support neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adapt, form new connections, and stay resilient over time. In simple terms, neuroplasticity is how the brain keeps learning, repairing, and staying sharp as we age. That's one reason regular exercise is so strongly linked to better mood, better cognition, and a lower risk of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So when muscles decline, it's not just about weakness. You lose an entire protective communication network that supports metabolism, immunity, and brain health. Cardiovascular fitness and VO2 max add another critical layer. VO2 max reflects how efficiently your heart and lungs, blood vessels, and mitochondria work together to produce energy. From a data standpoint, it's one of the strongest predictors of all-cause mortality that we have. Stronger than cholesterol, stronger than blood pressure, stronger than BMI. A higher VO2 max gives you physiologic reserve, or margins, if you want to think of it in those terms. It's the capacity that allows you to tolerate stress, illness, poor sleep, travel, or hard training without breaking down. When your reserve or your margins are high, stress costs you less. Illness hits you less hard. Recovery is faster. Aging progresses more slowly. So when reserve is low, even small stressors feel overwhelming. That's when people say, I just don't bounce back like I used to. That's a loss of reserve. From a longevity standpoint, muscle and VO2 max work together to preserve that reserve or those margins. Muscle protects structure, metabolism, insulin sensitivity, and brain signaling. VO2 max protects energy production, resilience, and survival. That's exactly why hybrid training or my high rocks training fits so well. A hybrid training focuses on strength and aerobic capacity to work together. It means moving load under fatigue or sustaining effort, recovering and repeating that. That combination truly mirrors real life. Life doesn't ask you to be strong in isolation or fit in isolation. It asks you to lift, to carry, to think clearly under stress and keep moving and keep going. So for me, hybrid training or high rocks training isn't about competition. It's a practical expression of longevity training. It builds muscle. It improves insulin sensitivity. It supports brain health. It drives VO2 max. And together, these systems preserve physiologic reserve, which is ultimately what keeps biological age lower and quality of life higher as the years go on.
People love to talk about supplements and peptides also, but rarely about sleep and recovery. So, what role does sleep and circadian rhythm really play in recovery play in lowering your biological age?
So, sleep and recovery are pretty foundational, probably more influential than anybody would really like to talk about. We live in a culture that loves hacks. Supplements, peptides, protocols, those have a role in the right context, but they all sit at the top of the foundation. If sleep and recovery are broken, everything else underperforms. From a biological standpoint, sleep is where aging is either accelerated or slowed. Sleep is when insulin sensitivity is restored. It's when growth hormone is released, tissue is repaired, memories are consolidated, and the nervous system resets. If you're short sleeping or consistently disrupting your circadian rhythm, you're sending an aging signal every single night, no matter how good your supplements are. Circadian rhythm matters just as much as total sleep time. Your body is built around predictable cycles, light and dark, activity and rest, feeding and fasting. And when these signals are inconsistent, such as late nights, irregular schedules, eating late, or constant stimulation, but the biology gets confused and recovery suffers. So for me, improving sleep wasn't about doing anything extreme. It was about doing the boring basics exceptionally well. I became very disciplined about going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time. Also, making sure that I'm getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, getting my morning light to anchor my circadian rhythm, reducing stimulation at night. That means, digital devices, TV, or anything that's stimulating. Also, it meant avoiding heavy meals close to bedtime. We know that this disrupts your circadian rhythm and your sleep cycles. Also, as important for me was sleeping in a cool and a dark environment. We know that actually this affects your sleep cycles. So recovery also meant changing how I trained and lived. Not training hard every single day, not stacking stress upon stress, not confusing exhaustion with progress. And one of the biggest mistakes I see, especially in high performers, is that they're trying to supplement poor sleep. But you can't hack circadian biology. When sleep and recovery improve, everything downstream improves. Your metabolic markers, inflammation, training capacity, mood, focus, resilience. And this is what I want listeners to hear clearly. You don't need to access advanced tools to fix sleep. You don't need perfect routines. You need consistency, awareness, and respect for biology. If someone listening made sleep a priority before adding anything else, before supplements, before peptides, before optimization, they would likely see meaningful improvements in energy, recovery, and health span within weeks. That's why sleep quietly lowers biological age. It doesn't get the headlines, but it changes everything.
At what point do hormones, peptides, and advanced therapies enter the picture? And how do you decide what's supportive versus what's unnecessary?
This is where balance really matters and where a lot of people get distracted. Hormones, peptides, advanced therapies absolutely have a role, but they're supporting actors, not the main character. I think of them as tools that support physiology, not tools that replace it. For me personally, and in the clinic, they enter the picture after the fundamentals are in place, meaning that sleep is reasonably consistent, nutrition is intentional, training and recovery are appropriate, and we actually understand what the data is telling us. If these foundations aren't solid, advanced tools don't work the way people hope that they will work. Sometimes they just make you feel temporarily better while the underlying problem keeps going. So instead of asking, what can we add? We ask, what does your physiology actually need? That's how we decide what's supportive versus unnecessary. Hormones are a great example. If someone truly has a deficiency or imbalance that's affecting their quality of life, cognition, recovery, or metabolic health, correcting that can be extremely helpful. But hormones aren't there to override poor sleep. They're not there to override chronic stress or a lack of movement. Peptides are similar in that aspect. Some peptides can support recovery, tissue repair, and metabolic signaling when they're used intentionally and appropriately. But you can't peptide your way out of a late bedtime, going without exercise or resistance training, or being in a constant state of stress. Biology just doesn't work that way. Advanced therapies can help close the gaps, but they don't cancel out bad inputs. One of the most common mistakes I see is people jumping straight to advanced tools because they're busy, they're frustrated, and they're looking for speed. But biology doesn't really do shortcuts. It rewards alignment. That's why, in our approach, these tools are layered in carefully and conservatively. They're tied to objectable data, they're reassessed regularly, and they're always placed in the context of the fundamentals. The goal isn't to do more. The goal is to do what actually helps without masking problems or creating false confidence. When people understand that hormones and peptides are adjuncts, not solutions, trust builds, because the focus stays where it belongs, supporting the body's systems, not chasing the next thing. When the systems are supported, the advanced tools actually work the way that they're supposed to.
Absolutely. And you also talk a lot about mindset, frequency, and positive psychology. So that can sound a bit abstract to people, but how does mindset actually show up in biology?
That's a fair question because when people hear words like mindset or frequency, it can sound abstract or even unscientific. But there's actually a very biological bridge here. When I talk about frequency, I'm referring to vibration and energy. We are energy beings. And this is the internal state where you spend most of your time. So, at a basic level, everything in biology operates through energy and signaling. Cells communicate through electrical gradients, through chemical messengers, through electromagnetic activity. Your brain and heart are literally electrical organs. So, your dominant emotion and mental state matters. Chronic states like fear, anger, resentment, or helplessness keep the nervous system activated. Cortisol stays elevated, inflammation rises, sleep fragments, recovery slows, and that's measurable. On the other hand, states like purpose, gratitude, optimism, and connection shift the nervous system toward a parasympathetic dominance, the state where repair, where learning, and adaptation happen. So we can see this in data. We see it with improved heart rate variability, lower inflammation markers, better sleep architecture, improved glucose regulation, faster recovery. So while the language of frequency may sound abstract, the outcomes are very concrete. Another important piece is repetition or frequency in the literal sense. Biology responds to what you reinforce daily, not what you do occasionally. Your thoughts, emotional patterns, and beliefs are repeated signals. So over time, these signals shape behavior, and behavior shapes biology. People who believe that they have agency over their health train more consistently, sleep more intentionally, recover better, and stick with changes long enough for the biology to adapt. For me personally, mindset isn't about pretending everything is positive or perfect. It's about choosing responsibility over helplessness. I believe aging is responsive. I believe effort matters. And I believe the body is far more adaptable than we once thought. That belief doesn't replace physiology. It it redirects it. And I believe that the body is far more adaptable than we ever thought. That belief doesn't replace physiology, it directs it. When mindset, energy, behavior, and biology are aligned, the results stop being abstract. They become measurable. And that's where longevity becomes something that you actually live and not just talk about.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of listeners might be thinking this while listening to this episode. Maybe I'm too old, or maybe I've already missed my chance. So if someone is having that response or thinking that way, what do they misunderstand about aging and biology?
So, this is one of the most common and most limiting beliefs I hear from patients. People say, I'm too old, or I've already missed my chance. And what they really misunderstand is how adaptable human biology actually is. Aging doesn't suddenly just lock you out at a certain birthday. There isn't a point where the body says, that's it, no more change allowed. Biology doesn't work in deadlines, it works in signals. As long as you're alive, your body is responding to what you do consistently. But we're talking about sleep, we're talking about movement, nutrition, stress, recovery, connection. And we see this over and over again. We see it in people in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s, and beyond, improving strength, fitness, metabolic health, cognition, resilience. This occurs when the right inputs are introduced. What often gets confused is time versus damage. Chronological age just tells us how long you've been here. Biological age reflects how much stress your systems have accumulated and how well they're functioning right now. And function can change. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to undo decades overnight. You don't need extreme protocols. You just need to start sending better signals consistently. Even small changes begin to shift biology in meaningful ways. We're talking about better sleep, a little more movement, some strength training, more intentional recovery. Another thing people get wrong is thinking aging is about decline. Aging is really about capacity. When you build muscle, improve fitness, and protect recovery, you increase your capacity. And when capacity goes up, fear goes down. That's the message I want people to hear. You haven't missed your chance. You're not broken. And it's not too late to feel stronger, clearer, and more capable. The body is far more forgiving and far more responsive than we ever thought. And once people understand that, aging stops feeling like something that's happening to them and it starts feeling like something that they can actively participate in. That shift alone changes everything.
That's so encouraging. I just felt encouraged by that as well. And I think that that's a perfect example of what the Young Lab is about. And I think that this episode perfectly captures the Young Lab and what it stands for. Not hype, not shortcuts, but inside out human optimization backed by evidence. And in upcoming episodes, we're going to break down each of these layers: nutrition, metabolic health, hormones, peptides, aesthetics, mindset, so you can apply them to your own life. And if this conversation challenged you to, or challenged how you think about aging, make sure to subscribe and join us. And I can't wait for future episodes to learn more about this with you, Dr. Young. And see you all next time. And thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.